Okay, so today we're going to go over assemblies and sub-assemblies. Last week we did grading, and that's one tool to grade sites out in Civil 3D. The other tool is a corridor model, and a corridor model is mainly for roadways, and but with that you need to use assemblies and sub-assemblies, which are basically like the road cross section. What's the road going to look like? So in here, I have just a blank drawing, and we got to go through some definitional stuff so you can understand it as you're working with some stuff. The first thing we want to do is create a assembly marker, and you can see here it's pretty. There's only two options, and unlike all the other drop downs, you can see it's pretty basic for assembly. So we're just going to hit create assembly, and this is just going to put a stick. It's just going to be a line that we can attach stuff to. So you can name this whatever. We could call this like site drive or something of that nature. And then you can see it's, the different types. You can get really complicated undivided highway, crowned road. You can, I guess, select that. So there's no divider. It's just a crowned road. You can see that the styles you can select there are pretty simple as well. You're always just going to want to have HLS basic and essentially the code set, which we'll talk about here in a second, HLS design. These get into more complicated things which you can use for doing cross sections, but nevertheless, just accept the defaults. Like always, accept the defaults down the road. You can change this up to undivided crown if you want, and then just go ahead and click somewhere on the screen. Now you can see that just put an assembly marker. There's really nothing that special about it. It's just a little stick. We can right click on it. We can hit assembly properties, and you can see the site name drive there, so on and so forth. And under construction, you can really see it's kind of just blank here, and same thing under codes. It's kind of just blank. This is just a spot to start to attach things. So how do we attach things? So we're going to need to bring up our control. So you hold down control and you hit the 3 key, and that will bring up our palette. Now you guys have been using this, hopefully, and populating this with the HLS palette. But with Civil 3D, you see these Civil 3D empirical sub-assemblies, metric, materials, all kinds of other stuff. So do take a look and explore that. What we're going to go right into here is the Civil 3D imperial sub-assemblies. And in here, you can have, these are common assemblies. So these are kind of pre-built assemblies that we can click on. So I can click one of these and then click up here, and then we get an assembly marker with all the sub-assemblies attached to it. So you can see it's kind of all baked together there. Now, if I go ahead and delete the assembly marker here, the whole thing goes. So this assembly marker is kind of the foundation of it. So back into here, and let me shut off some of these other palettes here. You can see there's a bunch of them, divided highway, so on and so forth. You can also see that these are now the basic assembly pieces. So this is a basic lane transition, so on and so forth, generic payment structure. There is a ton of them. And if you right click on any of these, you can go ahead and hit help, and that will take you to the help topic for that specific subassembly. And then you can read up on what it is, how it works. It has you can define the width, slope, and a depth. And you can see those parameters are here. And, it's just a basic lane. There's nothing that fancy about it. You can notice in here, you can't do, for this one, you can't have different sections of pavement, right? But honestly, for most of your work, you probably don't care about that. It's only really when you get into transportation type work where you're going to say, well, I'm going to really thread the needle on, how much my base course is and how much sub base will be under, how much base course is, how thick will the binding layer be, the wearing course, so on and so forth. So there's other more complicated assemblies that have that stuff in it. The important part is that for any of these, in any of these drop-down options, shoulders, medians, curves, daylights, so on and so forth, you can always right click and hit help, and then you can see what's going on with it. You can see you can do basic guide rail, cut to fill slopes. You have lane options here. Now these are the more complicated lanes. So this is a lane with super elevation option in it as well. So if you have a super elevated curb, or honestly, you rarely use a super elevated curb, but you do run into scenarios where you're having a road transition from a crown to a cross slope for a site, for drainage or whatever. And in that case, the best way to do that is using the super elevation sub-assemblies and techniques. And we'll show that. Not here today, but when we get into corridor modeling, we'll go through that part. So let's just drop a couple basic assemblies onto here. So we're going to go, or sub-assemblies. So this is called the assembly, and these are called the sub-assemblies, all these little pieces. And you do have these imperial assemblies, which basically combines everything together. So you can have just click it and go from there and modify it. So we're going to skip the easy route because I want to show you the details of stuff. And then obviously you can use the easier route in practice for just using these pre-built assemblies. And actually I have some for you in a template file that you can insert. So we can most likely just use that. But going back, basic here, basic lane, we're just going to go click on it. This pallet dock is, your pallet is docked. Essentially, this is saying, hey, do you want, there's some options in the pallet, like your AutoCAD palette, and if we notice it's docked, so you're not going to see those options. Do you really want to continue, or do you want to open up that palette? So I'm going to hit cancel here because it's right. We really do need our AutoCAD properties palette undocked. So we're going to take that. I'm going to bring this over here just for looking at it right now. And we're going to have that docked. When I click on this subassembly, or this, subassembly here, you can see my palette changes. And this is just my AutoCAD palette. And you can see some options down here at the bottom, this right, left, so on and so forth. So if I see how it's by default, it's set to right. So if I click this, it is going to add the object on the right-hand side. If I wanted it to be the left-hand side, I'd have to click this to left. Then if I click the assembly marker, then it puts it on the left. So that's why and I can adjust lane widths and depths and slopes right here as well before I added it. Or I could do it after, it just doesn't really matter either way. But that's why that was saying, hey, with sub-assemblies, when you're placing them from the palette, you really want to have your AutoCAD properties open. I mean, once you become an expert at this, they're all going to be from the right-hand side. The left or right is probably the biggest part, right? They're all going to be from the right-hand side add. So if you're an expert and you kind of know that and you're like, well, I do want it from the right-hand side. No, I don't need the palette open right now. You can just hit continue. All right, so we added a couple basic lanes on here. We're going to go ahead and hit enter. And we're going to look at one of these assemblies or these sub-assemblies. So there's a couple options here. You can click on it, and then you can see in the palette here, it allows you to define these parameters. So I can say this is a 5-foot wide lane or a 12-foot wide lane. I can adjust the depth, so I can say it's a 1-foot depth, and I can adjust the slopes to say it's a -4% cross slope. So I can adjust that in my properties, but you can notice I cannot change the left to right. See, that's how it's grayed out here. I can't change that. The other option is I can right-click on it and hit sub-assembly properties. I can hit that and go to parameters, and that's the same exact parameters. And here I can change from the right to the left. So do note that. And then it's the same parameters, just different way to access them. And we'll talk about codes here in just a second. The third way to access that is if I click on my assembly marker, right click on it, hit assembly properties. Then if I go to construction, you will actually see all the sub-assemblies. So this will be the right hand of side of the assembly marker. So this stuff will build out as I add more things. And this is the left-hand side of the subassembly. Now there's the reason there's one on both sides. So you can see if I go ahead and delete this, click on the subassembly, or the assembly, sorry, go back to construction. Now there's just a right hand. The left disappeared. And as I add more stuff on, you'll see it daisy chain. It'll actually show a daisy chain effect too. Like if stuff is attached to the edge of the lane, like a sidewalk or daylighting, then it will be underneath this one. And you can click on it here, and you can actually, modify the parameters here as well. And also here you can connect things together. Now there's nothing going to let me connect, but I can actually say, okay, well, if my lane gets wider, because you can have transitions where you can say, hey, instead of using a predefined lane width, like 12 feet, and it's very static, you could say I have a polyline that I want you to follow. And that might be a right-hand turn, like a shoulder widening or a road widening to make room for a right-hand turn lane. And you can just have a polyline on your plan and say, hey, just follow that. But you could say things like, well, as that gets wider, I also want my, I don't know why you would do this, but I also want my sidewalk to be wider or further from the street. So you could actually link, check this box and link your sidewalk width parameter back to your lane parameter, and then your lane parameter is linked to that polyline in your corridor model. So you can really get, there's a lot of flexibility here to really have these things do whatever you want. It doesn't have, you can do positive slopes as well. So you don't have to be restricted by negative or positive slopes, things of that nature. So the important thing is there's 3 ways to access it. Now, in early versions of Civil 3D, doing it through the AutoCAD palette sometimes produce funky results. If you ever edit a parameter and then it kind of like breaks the subassembly where the subassembly disappears, and I don't know, it just puts this vertical slash like right here, and put like this diagonal slash across here, and then this thing would disappear because I edited a width. Like if I take this down to 0, see how it looks like that? Now obviously for 0, that's because you can't have a lane of 0 width. You got to have some width. But if you ever are editing a normal parameter, like, I don't know, you just change it from 6 to 12 or some other, it's usually not something basic. It's usually something a little bit more complex. But if you edited something and you get this, then back up and don't do it through the AutoCAD palette. Try doing it through just the subassembly properties, or the assembly properties, where you'd right-click on the subassembly, hit properties, or right-click on the assembly and hit properties. Try doing it through these dialogues. The reason it was, back in the day, you'd get that glitch. I don't know if it's totally gone. It's obviously subsided over time. You don't get that as much. But if it does happen, that was a fix. And the explanation is, this is an AutoCAD thing, the properties palette. But obviously these dialogues are Civil 3D dialogues. So when I click this, I'm getting this is a Civil 3D dialogue. So obviously the glitch was somehow occurring between, the Civil 3D team's code and the AutoCAD team's code. And so if you just kept with the Civil 3D team's code, then it worked fine. So just keep that in mind in the back of your head. So with subassemblies, you can just keep, like I said, just keep daisy chaining things out. So I can do a basic shoulder now as well, and I can attach that to these little markers here. And then I can come over to here and I can say, okay, we're going to do a basic ditch, and click that as well, and so on and so forth. And you can kind of see some of these parameters here. I can do cut and fill slopes. You can say how far the cut, how far the fill. Is there a bottom width? So this is what this is getting towards, is that if you have a fill, it will do a channel. You can do a channel first and then go up and daylight to the fill, versus, or I'm sorry, a cut. If you have a cut, it would do a channel first and then go up to the cut. Or if it's a fill, it just would come out a flat distance and come down the fill. So you can build in some logic, and that's why this is a little bit more complicated here. But there's some fundamental things you will need to know to be able to navigate the help and work with subassemblies. So let's get into that. Okay, so by definition, a subassembly is made up of parts. Now, it's just all ingrained. You can see as I was selecting the subassembly, it was just one object. And just like everything else, it's its own object type. If you click it and look in the AutoCAD properties, you'll see a subassembly is its own thing. But one of the object types is a link. So these blue lines that you see here, those are called quote, quote, links. It's just a definition thing you just need to know. So when you see the word link in help or in any of the other dialogues, it's referring to the line. It's referring to the line that connects the point codes. So the point codes are these little magenta circles. So point codes can be wherever, and they are connected together by links. The gray shaded area that's in between is called the shape. So yeah, point codes is the most basic part. Point codes are connected by links from one spot to another. And then the enclosed area is a shape. So why do you need all this? Well, if I want to tell a lane to follow a polyline or a feature line, I have to tell it what part. So these point codes have names in each subassembly. So for this one, this would be the edge of pavement. This is called the crown. So you'll look in there and you'll say, okay, so I'm going to hit, as I'm going through this stuff, I'm going to see these dots, and you're telling me they're going to have names. How am I going to know what dots are named what? We're going to have to look at the help. So if I back up here and go back into CAD, the other option to get to help is if you just right click on it, hit assembly, subassembly properties, and then just hit help down here. And that will take you to the help. You got to have your dialog closed. That will take you to help on that subassembly. So you know, you don't necessarily need it from the palette. You can get it. It's not how it used to work. Parameters. Oh, right here, subassembly. I'm sorry. This takes you to the general help. You want to hit this subassembly help here. My bad. That will take you specifically again. So you can go into somebody else's drawing and be like, I don't know what subassembly that's named over in the palette. How much, you know, it does say basic lane up here, so you can connect those dots. But the you just go into the properties, go into parameters, and then you can hit this little chevron. No, it's not a chevron. Ellipsis down here to get to the help. And when I'm going down here, you'll see these codes. See how it's P1, crown. P2, edge of travelway. P3, crown subbase. So you can see, so when you're in the corridor properties, you will see these point code names. Crown, edge of travelway. These are all standardized. And if you need to thread the needle on what's what, the help is where you're going to need to do that. Honestly, it becomes like crown is the crown on all the subassemblies. So it's, you know, it's not rocket science. Edge of travelway is always the edge of the paved edge. So if you're in the corridor model, which we'll eventually get to here, and you're like, well, I want the road to, you know, get wider and narrower by this polyline I have defined over here on the right-hand side. What, you know, you'll see this big list of these codes. It'll say crown, edge, travelway, blah, 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 blah. Like, which one do I need to click the dialog and say, hey, go follow this polyline? Well, edge of travelway. It's always going to be edge of travelway for the edge of the road itself. Now, if you wanted to try to thread the needle even more, sure, you can get into these. When you're trying to define a surface from the corridor model, it's going to say, hey, what do you want me to build the surface on? it builds surfaces on the links. See this line? That's why it's called L. So obviously top pave is what I want. Top is always going to be the very top of all the subassemblies. So if you build a surface based off top, it's the top of your corridor model. If you wanted to thread the needle and do a surface that is more accurate to, like earthwork, because honestly, when they're doing earthwork, they're not, when you're doing earthwork across a road area, well, the road's not made of earth. They're going to import those materials, gravel and pavement, and put it down. So precise earthwork is really the sub base, the bottom of the sub base. Well, that's always datum. So if you want the very top of a corridor model, it's always top to build the surface from in the corridor, and it's always datum. So I know we're not in the corridor model, and I'm not showing you that just this second, but you can see you kind of need to know what they're referring to, and that's all within the subassemblies. It's baked in, it's in the help. There's a couple ways to get to it, either in the subassembly, on the palette by right-clicking on it in help, or just go into the subassembly itself. You can see the shape here, and the shape gets more complex with more complex subassemblies, and then you can kind of see some of the terms here that you'll see in the corridor model. Top is always the top of the it's from here to here essentially, and then if you have another subassembly, it would be the top sections of that one, so on and so forth. Datum is always the bottom. So it's honestly, it comes down this edge, goes along here, and goes back up. But if there's another subassembly connected here, and there's another datum line, it would just continue to go out and follow the very bottom. 99.99% of the time, we're really just interested in top and datum, or datum. We want we're just kind of making a surface for presentation of the project for final grades, or we want to do a cut to volume and we want to take out the road section, then we want to do datum and use that for a temporary surface to do our earthwork. 99.9% of the time, you're interested in the crown and the edge of travel way to make things get wider or narrower based on whatever you want. A lot of this other stuff, it needs to define every point, just computer-wise. So they had to do this and name the things. So they did. If you want to know what they are, it's in the help. Shapes, you can see S1, that shape is called pavement. So S1, pave 1. So why would you need that? Well, if you wanted to, on transportation projects or even the site, like how much, I've never really seen anybody do this, but say they want to say, well, how much macadam am I going to need? Well, first of all, it's kind of simple if the road's the same width everywhere. You just take the length multiplied by the width and depth, and boom, that's how many cubic yards of pavement you'll need. But if it varies and there's cul-de-sacs and all their stuff, it's honestly still pretty simple because you just take the perimeter of the curb and multiply it by the depths and boom, there you go. But, if say you had multiple sections, it's not just the whole road section. You wanted to say, well, how much subbase would I need? How much binder would I need? How much overlay will I need? Each of these shapes will have a different tag, and then you can get a quantity based on this tag. So here we'd be looking for pave 1 would be the tag we're looking for, because that's the shape area. I think I might have kind of explained all this already. Yeah, so again, just to reiterate, links are going to be used for surface creation, render materials, and plan view hatches. So if you want to render it, it's going to be saying what links are what. If you want to, you can have it automatically hatch your roadways based on the links. Honestly, it's very easy. And that's what, links are what are generating that stuff. Point codes are going to be used for stretching subassemblies. And when you're going to say, hey, I want to get a feature line from this, I don't want to use the corridor model, I just want to, spit me out a feature line. You're going to need to know what point code you want it from. You can use point codes to generate surfaces, but it's much easier to use links to do that in the corridor model. And shapes, you're going to use that to compute volumes, and hatches in cross sections. But we're not really getting into cross sections. From my understanding, you guys don't really, most firms don't do cross sections unless you're really heavily in the transportation sector. So we talked about this. The top is the top, the datum is the datum. And then in this specific one, we have pavement, pave 1, pave 2, pave 3, sub or base and sub base. These are the different link names. So you can see out of those links, that's kind of how the breakdown is. So pave 1, you saw in the help, it was top, comma, pave 1, because this link on top has two definitions. It has two, it's named twice. It's a top and it's a pave. So if you pick pave, you're going to get just the top link. If you pick top, you get the same thing. Now, top continues on. So all the tops are named top. All the datums are named datums for all the subassemblies. So that is it. So far we hit subassembly elements, looking up guidance, subassembly tool palettes, editing through the assembly properties, and we'll talk about super elevation parts and talk about bringing in some stuff. So there is a tool here to simplify things, and I'll send this to you, Donnie, but I've developed basically a block that you can insert to make things a little simpler. So I'm going to go ahead and show you that here real quick. And then we'll go ahead and make a corridor model. Skip ahead a little bit here and do a corridor model. So we'll probably have some time. Where did I put it? Class. So I'll send you this. This is going to be a assemblies block. And you would literally use the AutoCAD insert command and go browse and grab it. So I'm going to go ahead and hit open here. Now, one unique thing about this assemblies block is we do want to explode it on insert. We don't want to insert it and explode it later. I mean, you can, but it messes up the naming a little bit. I mean, it works, everything works fine. It's just messier. Like I said, technically it works fine. So make sure you do on screen and then explode. That's the key part when you're inserting this. Go ahead, hit OK. I'm going to go pick a spot. And it's going to insert that into this drawing, and it's going to explode it at the same time. Give it a second. So what is this? Well, I went through and just kind of picked out what assemblies and subassemblies I would use to do basic things. Like if you have a edge of road, an edge of pavement kind of condition where it's, just have a simple road section. There's no curb or anything. It's just, you just want a road section. Here it has daylight on both sides, daylight on the right, left, so it's only half lanes. And we'll get into, you'll see why we're going to need these variants. Because there's a part in the software where it automatically does the intersection. It will grade out the intersection for you. But it needs all these variants. It needs to say, okay, well, what's your full section assembly look like? What's your right as your, what's the assembly look like for when you're on the right-hand side of the intersection, the through lane on the right-hand side, the through lane on the left-hand side, right lane only, left lane only, so on and so forth. And you'll define these, you'll pick these since they're already in here now, and then that's all you need to do, honestly. And we actually have subassembly sets that you can import that use these, so you don't even have to pick them. They're there. What this did by bringing this subassembly set in is now this is under assemblies. This is all populated. See all these? If I would have inserted this and forgot to explode it, honestly, I would undo to go back and do that correctly. But if I would have done that and then hit regen, it would have put a 1 out here. What it does in that scenario is it puts a 1 behind all the assembly names because they're technically in the drawing twice because the block is in the drawing as a block, right? And then when you exploded it, well, now they're in there unexploded, so that's in there again. So then it has to do the 1. It just doubles up on all these here. It's kind of messy. Everything still works, just kind of messy. These names are linked to this. So if I click on here and I hit assembly properties and I change this to super font class and I hit OK and then I hit a regen, you're going to see that name down here update. And this is just a piece of M text. That's a field. And if I double click on it, it'll take me right into the fields. And then I pick the field category as object, pick the assembly, told it to be the name, and then boom, there you go. So if you ever see these all go and you do a regen and they all have 1 after them, that's kind of an indicator that you forgot to hit explode on it on insert. Okay. So the intent again is that for most projects, you're going to simply have an alignment, a proposed design, and then just be able to insert this block and have almost everything you're going to need right here in one shot. Now, the widths might not be right, and you can see we've got an edge of pavement, a vertical curb, mounted curb, wedge curb. This is a widening. If you have to do like a mill or a widening project where you're doing an overlay and then widening out the road. And then usually in that case, they're going to make you do a sub-base drain and some daylighting. These are overlay. If you have to just do an overlay for something. So these are, you probably have more than you need. If you wanted to model a trench and say, okay, well, I wanted to do the cut volume for a trench. You have to do that for PennDOT projects a lot because you have to do you have to tell it how many cubic yards you're looking at, and you have to do, most of the time, you have to do laybacks. So you can kind of use this to do that. There's a section for doing labeling and cross sections, which you probably won't get to. You can do pressure pipes with corridors. Those are all the sub-assemblies you need there. Channels, if you're going through a site, detention ponds, E&S basins, like traps and stuff you can do with corridor models. And then some Marcellus ones here I had from a long time ago. Hopefully you guys don't get into this stuff. This work sucks. So, but they're there. You probably take that out. So 9 times out of 10, I insert this whole thing, get my corridor model built, then go through and be like, okay, well, which ones of these didn't I use? Like, oh, I didn't use any of this stuff. So if you're not using certain things, you just go ahead and delete it. This is a custom block just to put your own, like if you have to make your own, you can put them down there in a nice little gridded structure. Say you're not using any of these widening and trenchy ones, you can just go ahead and delete them. When you do that, you're going to see this list over here in the prospector shrink up. And again, here you can hit properties here as well. These are the assembly markers. Here's the lanes. You can kind of see everything there. It's kind of the same as you see from assembly properties, like I said before. If you're going to move these, you can just grab the whole thing. Let's see if this works right. Yeah, you just grab the whole thing and move the whole thing down. That used to be problematic, but they fixed that in version. So you can just move it around wherever you want. Rename them, do whatever. You can right click on it here. So I'm going to click on this assembly marker, hit assembly properties. Then I can kind of show you the construction a little bit more clearly. This has a right lane, left lane, and then it's really just a lane with a daylight general on the right-hand side. That's all it is. But this is kind of programmed into, or the settings in here are not just the stock you get out of the palette. They're kind of a little bit more make sense. They have some of the stuff built in, like if you're doing a fill, you usually want to have a little bit more flat area up top than if in a cut. You don't have a channel added in there, but you can add that in. The daylighting that's used here is honestly a little bit more of a complicated daylighting. You can see there's a number of parameters in here. But in my experience, you kind of need this because you just get into these situations where you're like, oh, I want to do a channel and not a channel, or if it's over a certain daylight length, I want the slope to be a 2-to-1 instead of a 3-to-1. So that's kind of in here already and can utilize some of that stuff. Honestly, this is more basic than it seems when you're looking at it here. You see a lot of parameters, but these are all kind of the same. This is to define the channel. Like I want to go down 3-to-1, or I'm going down 3-to-1, and then I have a flat space at the bottom, so on and so forth, and then you got to go up the other side. So you can see that's not baked in here already, but it's you can do up to 8 different slopes for a channel off to the side of the road in a cut scenario. In a fill scenario, you can only do 3 different widths, so you can go out and have a couple different options there. Usually you don't need more than 3, but that's the max. So that's what's in here. Let's pop into our drawings. Are there any questions on assemblies or sub-assemblies?
No, we're good.
Making some sense with the definition pieces?
Yeah.
That's the hardest thing with these when it comes to the quarter models, just the definition of stuff. Just knowing like, okay, well, that's assembly, that's a sub-assembly. Those two things need to work together. Link, code, that kind of stuff. It used to be way more complicated in LAN desktop. ServCAD uses something that's very similar to the sub-assembly look. But last time I was using ServCAD, it was do you guys ever use that? They had assemblies as well. You ever used it? Okay. It looked exactly the same, but it was like its own dialogue that you had to open off to the side, and then you could kind of build and fiddle. It was honestly, it was a lot better than LAN desktop, because LAN desktop was very cryptic in how it worked, and it was not easy to understand. It worked great but it was not easy to understand. So Civil 3, I think, has the best of both worlds because it's pretty easy to understand, and it's right there on the screen. So let me, did we design this road? Yeah, we kind of did. Yeah, that's good enough. Okay, so we have, this alignment going up through. We have this, and then we're kind of starting to cheat into the next creating the corridor model. It's the next week, but we'll get into it. We'll go back. I'll do it again then. So all we really need for a corridor model is an alignment, a design profile, and you don't even need a design profile. You just need a profile. I could have it follow existing. It doesn't care. I could tell it to follow this line, which would kind of be weird, or this line. So I'm going to follow our design. And then you need an assembly. That's it. You just need those 3 pieces. So the missing piece is the assembly, and the intent here is like, oh, I gotta go build an assembly and all this other rigmarole. Well, the intent is you can just use these. So hit import assemblies, make sure explode's selected there. Usually I'll put them off, maybe up here or something. Inserts them in. Whoops, it takes a second. And then we have all the assemblies we need. Okay, so I'm not even going to worry about the widths yet and the adjustments because you can make all that stuff on the fly. Like, I don't even know what those lane widths are. I don't. We'll get there. So I'm just going to go now and hit to the home and hit create corridor model. See, it's pretty basic. Corridor. It's the top one. We're going to call this site entrance, and a corridor model is, you don't have one corridor model per alignment. So let me say that again. You do not have one corridor per alignment. You can if they're separated and it makes sense that way, but it's much like a pipe network. You can have, and honestly, when you have like a whole big site, you honestly want to have just one corridor model, because the intersection, the auto intersection tool, uh, depends on, it's meant that all the stuff is pulled together in one big corridor model. Now, if you have like a site, but there's a big gap, like there's roads over here, and then there's like another phase, and there's a mountain in between or something, then there's roads over here, they're spatially separated, then that makes sense to have two different corridor models, right? One's not connected. But if they're intermingled and tying into each other, yeah. If you're doing a corridor model for roads, but then you also want to use corridor modeling for like to do a channel, like, oh, instead of grading this channel, I'm just gonna, because it can be really easy with corridor model. Like, I'm gonna make an alignment, I'm gonna tell the corridor model to follow the existing grade, and I'm gonna offset the channel down and make a corridor model. So you can make a corridor model just for like channel grading, and it's very easy to do it that way. You don't have to get into grading objects and all that other stuff. Corridor models are super stable. So that's how I kind of use them when it's long things that can get semi-complicated. What's nice about corridor models is they're not going to crash your computer. Whereas if you're getting into semi-complicated stuff with grading objects, you remember we talked about before, you don't want to get too far with that before you explode them. So I like to use corridor models a lot just because they're kind of basic, and they're easy to work with, and that's why you'll see in here like berms. I'll do berms with a corridor model, and channels, because channels are really easy with a corridor model. I have to show you one thing over here yet that I forgot. I'll get to that in a second. So anyways, I'm going to call this site entrance. Again, just like everything else, just the defaults are pretty much good to go here. Baseline type, you can use a baseline of even a feature line. You don't need an alignment or profile. So if you think about it, a feature line is essentially an alignment and a profile squashed together. Whereas an alignment and a profile, this is my horizontal, this is my vertical, right? Where a feature line, it's like both. It's the horizontal and the vertical all squashed together. So you can use a feature line for a baseline. And then you can pick it, what site. And then remember talking about naming of feature lines? This is where you would want to name your feature line. So if you, for some reason, had a feature line that you wanted to be kind of used as an alignment and a profile, then you should name that feature line. Give it, name it whatever you want, but you should name it. So in this example, we're going to use just an alignment and profile. So it's going to get horizontal from alignment, vertical from the profile. We got to pick the vertical. So these profiles auto name, but in the naming structure, hopefully it makes sense. E.g. surface design or site design is the red line. So any of the design ones you lay down will be called design. And then here's the subassembly. So we're just going to hit I don't know. Let's just do edge of pavement full. So that's this top subassembly over here. Target surface is going to target my existing grade. All right. Set baseline and region parameters. We'll just hit OK. See what happens there. I can't remember. All right. So it's going to take you into the corridor dialog. So this is the base of the corridor dialog here. Doesn't have everything. We'll come back into this in just a second. Essentially, it's asking me if I want to edit any of these parameters. I'm going to go ahead and just hit OK here, just to come back in to see this from corridor properties, just so you can see it. So I would just hit OK. This came up because that checkbox at the last dialog was checked. If you'd uncheck that, this wouldn't even come up. Just go hit OK. It's going to go ahead and generate the corridor. So you can see it right here. Let's go look at it in 3D. So if I go over here, ports, or I'm sorry, DB point, and I usually do here and 15. And then you can look and you can see there's that corridor model. So it's basically, this is taking those assemblies and it's putting them along the horizontal of the alignment and the vertical of the profile, right? Now, obviously, everything's linked together. So if I grab this alignment and move it, my profile view will update. right? Because the alignment got longer or shorter. And my corridor will ask to be updated. So if I move the alignment, this profile view will change. I might have to probably make tweaks to my design profile. If I grab the design profile then and move it up and down, my corridor model is going to ask to be changed. So let me slide that up, and you can see here in the prospector, if I go into here, corridor, you can see that little, hey, I need an update thing. That's a little chevron looking thing that needs update, a little warning symbol. So you can right click and hit rebuild or rebuild automatic, okay? Rebuild automatic, just automatically rebuild it. Normally you can just leave it. Corridor models rebuild pretty quick, so you can usually just leave it rebuild automatic until it gets kind of complicated, with big sites, multiple intersections, then you might not want to do that to yourself. And you want to uncheck that. Okay, so to edit anything of this corridor model, I'm going to go ahead and hit corridor properties. So I'm going to right click on the property, on the item here, and hit properties, or of course, as always, you can right click on the object here and hit corridor properties, either way, right? This takes you into the corridor dialog. And in this dialog is everything you'll need to edit the corridor. You can also edit all this stuff through, you notice when I clicked on the corridor, you can have these quick access tools here, add region, delete region, merge, blah, 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 blah. These are just quick tools to do stuff you could get in here. Honestly, when I started in Civil 3D, we didn't even have these tools up here at all. So, the only way to do it was the corridor properties. What they've done now is they've made, it available in both places. If you do use the ribbon, it does rebuild faster. Like if you edit stuff using this, it will just update just that one region or just that one section of the alignment of the corridor to redo the calculations. Where if you use this tool for the properties, it rebuilds the whole thing, which, when the corridor is small, and it takes, instead of this taking 0.25 seconds, it takes 0.5 seconds here, so it's not a big deal. But when it's a massive corridor, then you can lean on that kind of stuff. So here's just the name, the style. Here's that dialog again. We'll come back to this. Codes, remember these? Links, points, shapes. These are the point codes, edge of travel way. So we know what this stuff is, right? We just talked about it and what different things are. So this is the top link. You can add labels to it. You can do pay items, all kinds of stuff. Shapes here as well. Feature line. So you can say, hey, I want you to draw a feature line. So let's do edge of travel way. I want a feature line on the outside edge of the road. So right now, see this outside edge? There's no feature line here. That line, that burnt dark yellow line you maybe see on the screen, that's from your base file I have xref'd in. But if I wanted Civil 3 to draw me a feature line right there, I would just edge of travel way, like how do I know that it's edge of travel way? Because remember in the subassembly properties, it's always edge of travel way for that edge. And I'm going to say, hey, feature line, go ahead and draw me. We can have a couple options here. Honestly, you can do a edge of roadway, which will put it on the right layer. Will actually look like your edge of road. So in Autodesk's vision, if you would have a highway project, you would not manually draw the curb lines and stuff. You would have that all be based on the corridor. So the only thing you would have is the alignment, profile, and the corridor model. And then all the 2D stuff to see like the sidewalks and the curbs and the stripes, even the striping, that would all be based off the corridor. That's their vision. Is that what happens in practicality? No, it doesn't. Most of the time you have it drawn in 2D and then you use the corridor model to grade stuff in 3D. So, but it is an option. That's why you have these different names here, because if you use this edge of travel way, if I look at that style, that's going to, oh, it's actually not set correctly. But here, what the intent is that it could be targeted to your edge of roadway layer. That's actually not set, shouldn't be 0. And then, like I said, it would have the right line type and all that jazz. So if you do need that, let me know. Most of the time, we just want some sort of generic line out there. So we'll use a, I thought there was a general in your notice. Yeah, HLS general, and hit OK. And then if, as soon as I hit OK here again, you'll see this brown line show up here. We'll get to that. So you can create a surface from the corridor. So we could do that here. Remember here, links, top, pave, blah, 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 blah. So we always want to use top. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's hit surface. We're going to name this. So this is physically going to make another surface up here. You'll see it here in a little bit. I'm going to call this underscore corridor. All right, because this is generated from this corridor. Usually honestly, I would call it site and transport, right? There we go. No, I kind of misspelled that back down there. So that's going to make a surface up here. Once we expand this, you'll see it. And it's going to be called this. Remember, it's not our final grade because we have to combine it with other things, right? This is just the site drive. We also have the grading over here for the detention pond and stuff. So you can see how if you're doing the grading of the detention pond as it you know, as feature lines, and then you have this corridor here, your FG surface is usually a composite of those things put together. So that's why you'll need that surface merge or paste. That's not merge. The surface paste command, so you can paste different surfaces together. So that's why we'll cover that as a fundamental. Okay, this will make a blank surface right now. There'd be nothing in it, so I don't want that. I want it to use the links. I can also use feature lines, like I talked about before, and then these are the codes. So I could say, okay, use the crown, use the edge of travelway, and then it would just use those two. So if I just wanted the pavement, I could say use feature lines, crown, I would hit crown, add, and then edge of travelway, add, okay? And then it would just do it's almost gonna treat those as like brake lines. It's not almost. It's exactly gonna treat those as like brake lines running up through the middle on the crown and running along the road edge. But then it will not give me the grading of this daylight. And maybe that's what I want, you know? So that's where feature lines are handy. So if I hit, let me just hit OK here, let me show you. So you can see here now, I don't have a boundary on this yet, but you can see it just graded the roadway because it's acting like there's a crown feature line and an edge of travelway. Oh, and by the way, there's that feature line that I talked about that's going to show up because I added that feature line as you know, for that code to display that feature line for me. Now, there's a reason I would do this. And you can see my fidelity, I guess I would say, if I would want to do this approach, isn't high enough. I would need more samples along here. And this is why I know Autodesk's vision is to use feature lines like that to represent the 2D for plan view. But in reality, the best it can do is line segments. So this is actually an arc. So we want it to really be an arc. So that's why their vision doesn't fully pan out. But I explained the vision because so you can see why some of the stuff's in the code. It's just a lot of times from Autodesk, they're reaching further than the industry is prepared to go, or their goals are good, but they're lacking a couple pivotal things. Like to me, this is pivotal. Like if you want people to use that, then that means this needs to generate a curve, not this segmented line thing. But you can, there's some things you can do with this feature line to then grade off of it and have it that your feature lines are linked to this feature line. So when your corridor goes up and down, the feature lines that come into it move as well. So that's why that's a useful tool, yeah. Okay, so that's you can see that surface is being generated there. If I'm gonna go back into the corridor properties, if I wanted to do a boundary on that, I could go to boundary, hit add, and there's a cheap little tool trick here, you can use corridor extents as outer bounds. So when the corridor is simple, you can usually use that. So you can just right click on that and hit add, and then it will kind of go to the edge of the corridor. Now, since my grading is not going to the full edge of the corridor, it doesn't work perfectly, but their vision is that, you know, you're using it all the way out. You can add a boundary manually, that kind of stuff. So ultimately, we're going to just change this here real shortly to show the full grading, you know, with the daylight lines and everything here as well. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to go back into corridor properties. I'm going to go to surface. I'm going to take these out. I want more than just that. I want it to be the entire top surface. And this is what you're going to use 99.9% of the time. Links, top, add, done. Sometimes if it's not building right or it's not looking how you want it to look, like a contour is not pulling the correct way, sometimes try to add them as break lines. You just come back in here and check that, see if it works better. If it doesn't, then you can uncheck it. That doesn't, you know, that's kind of a try it both ways if something's not looking right. Same thing with top links or bottom links. If you have overhangs where, you know, you have a top on top of a top for some reason, I don't know where you'd have that, but, you know, what is it going to use? In here, it'd be using none, but you can tell it to use the top one or the bottom one. Hit OK. All right, so now it's graded that whole thing out. And now you can see the boundary seems to make more sense for the thing. Now, obviously, if I grab this alignment, slide this down, my corridor will update, and you can see the grading ramifications right there. So it's pretty straightforward. If I come back up into my assemblies and I say, okay, well, I want to adjust this road width because honestly I'm a little too wide. So what do I want it to be? So I want it to be 12 feet. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the assembly marker, hit properties, go to construction. This is my lane outside super. It's at 14. Change that to 12. I got to do both sides. Change this to 12. I'll leave the rest go for now. Hit OK. Corridor rebuilds, shrinks that in. You can see, we looked before, this gray line was out here. Now it's slid into here. You can still see it's segmenting the curve there, but there you go. The other thing you can do is, let's see if I can do this up here. Let's go to view. If I do, join store. I really want this one. I guess that's going to do the whole screen in it. Yeah, all right. So you can kind of see the corridor model here coming up through. You can see the grading we have off to here, right? And then down here, we can set this on our profile and then set this on our alignment, right? Kind of get some screen views. And honestly, we don't need to chew up all that real estate, so let's open that up a little bit. And then you can get working. You guys have the dual screens. A lot of times, I have a dual screen here as well. You would, most of the time when you're doing this kind of stuff, usually drag CAD to go across both screens. And then this split divider is actually in the middle between the two screens. So you don't see it. And then you have a lot of real estate on each view, so you can kind of see what's going on. If I wanted to make these segments tighter, I can go into corridor properties again. So you're always going back to corridor properties, or you can use these tools up here, but I usually just go back in here. You're going to go to the parameters, and we'll talk about this, and then we'll leave with that. And we'll kind of re-hit on this stuff again, because next week is corridor modeling. This is the baseline. So it starts with a baseline. That's why it's BL, and it just names it. So you can just leave the auto name or name it whatever you want to do there. But essentially in a baseline, it's what is my alignment, horizontal, what is my vertical. That's what you're defining under the baseline. Okay. Then the next part is the region. And you can have as many baselines as you want. So I can add another baseline. And this is why you can have multiple alignments in a single corridor model. You can have hundreds of baselines, hundreds of alignments. And then under those baselines, you would tell it what's the alignment, what's the profile. Then under each baseline, it's basically just what's the assembly? What's the cross section you want me to follow along this alignment and design profile. Once you define that, what assembly, I can change it here. I can change it, any of this stuff is changeable. I can change this to be a different alignment if I want right now. I don't have another one. I can change it to be a feature line if I wanted to now for that baseline. I can change this to be a different profile if I wanted to. I can follow the existing grade. I don't really do that, but down under the region, you can say, okay, well, what station is it going to go from? I don't need to start, right now it's going from the start to the end. Well, I can tell it to start here, and I can tell it to end here. And then if I hit OK, it's only going to do the corridor model between those two stations. See that? So then what you can do with that is you can say, okay, well, here to here, we're following that certain assembly setup. But then at another area, we're going to follow a different assembly. So you can add another region and say, okay, well, from farther up, we're going to use, I don't know, let's just use the let's just use the left-hand side. Yeah. So from here, up, yeah, from here up, we're going to use the other side. I got to tell it the target. So in this region, so what we're setting up is the bottom section here, we're doing daylight on both sides. But this top section, as we're coming around the basin, we're only going to daylight on the left-hand side. We're not going to daylight as we're going up. We're not going to daylight on the right. Why? Because we're using custom grading on the right-hand side. So I got to tell it a couple things yet. So this is the range. I can tell it the frequency. So that's, these samples that it's doing are every 25 feet. So I can go into here and set that up. They're all default 25. And it's not just 25. It's along tangents, it's 25 feet. Along curves, it's as increment. And then it's, again, 25 feet here. But you can change. This can be by curvature, so on and so forth. I never used that before, by curvature. Let's see what that does. Oh, it's the mid-ordinate. So it's going to use the mid-ordinate distance stuff. Along vertical curves, 25 feet. But it's going to also make sure it hits the high points, the low points, the geometric points, like point of tangency, point out. So it's kind of, if you wanted it to just be every 25 feet, you'd have to turn some of this stuff off. You have to say no, 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 no. And then if I wanted this to be by increment 25, again, no, no, because these are horizontal geometry points, like where the curve starts on the alignment or the curve ends on the alignment, it's going to drop a sample. But not anymore because I told it no. Same thing on the vertical curve, where the vertical curve, you can see this little spot here where it goes from a tangent to a vertical curve and back up. That's a geometric point. So it would drop an assembly there as well, which it should. But just for simplicity, we'll just turn that off for now, just to show you. Same thing here, targets. It needs to know what the target surface is. So how's it going to what's it going to daylight to? And you can see here's the daylight targets, e.g., so on and so forth. So I need to do that down here. Target surface, e.g., and then it will input that there. If you hit this top thing, it would use that target for all, anything that's a surface target, it would use whatever you selected up here, because sometimes you have multiple. That whole thing where I was telling you about, oh, well, I want my roadway to get wider or narrower based on some polyline I have. That's where you do it right here. So you can see this is the width and offset targets. This is the slope. So you can actually use feature lines here too. You can adjust the vertical if you want. So width slope here, hopefully some of the naming makes some sense. This is super outside. This is the lane outside super left. This is the right-hand side, left-hand side of the road. So if it's the right-hand side of the road, I'd hit this drop down here for the width target. And then I can have it target another alignment or another feature line, survey figure, or polyline. And then again, I can select it from the drawing, select it by a layer. So you got a lot of options. But that's what those are. If they're blank, it just uses the whatever width is set in the assembly. Let's go ahead and hit OK here. And you can see now here, it's subtle because there's not much grading. We should probably bring this up, I guess. You can see here now we're grading daylighting on both sides up until that station that I had set. And then it now only daylights on this one side because we're going to use custom grading on this side. You see how that works. And then if I select my corridor, I can have these little pick indicators here as well. So I can split this apart and like add a gap in between for some reason if I want to add in another customization. Or I can just grab this double chevron thing here. And I can slide the whole region like, I was a little conservative on that. I need to slide that up a little bit. Let's continue that daylight grading. Honestly, if it was me, I'd probably continue it like up to here. And then from here, this would be a grading object that daylighted down. Or honestly, this would just, once I add this into the surface and this into the surface, it would naturally just grade between these two things. Now, if I wanted a little channel here, I would probably add that channel into this assembly. Like this assembly that I used there is this one. All right. So if I wanted to have a channel over here, I would just add that in right now. And then it would have like a little channel here to get water to go down this way. Same thing down here if I wanted to bring this out. You can just drag this back. A lot of the region edits where you can split a region, add a region, edit the frequency, that's all right up here. So you don't have to constantly be going into the corridor properties, isolate a region, hide a region, show all regions, delete a region, so on and so forth. So a lot of the region editing stuff is here. It's kind of nice. So check that out. Is there any questions on corridors? We'll touch more on this next week. But we honestly got through a lot of it today. Feature line settings, surfaces by corridor, so on and so forth. Does that make some sense on how that works?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. The basics of it are, it's where you start getting into the customization that you start to go down the rabbit hole, right? But the basics to make a corridor are simple. Alignment, profile, bring in this block, pick one of these, it will grade it out. Then from there, you can start fiddling with it. If you want this sampling to be tighter for some reason, 25 is not close enough for you, you can go to the baseline. I can hit frequency up here, and then it will adjust all these. If I hit it at the top level, we'll adjust everything below it. So I'm going to go ahead and toggle these back on, because normally you would have those toggled on. And let's just do 5 feet. That's pushing it. Let's just do 10. I mean, you can go as low as you want. It's and it won't crash or anything like that. It'll just take, if you have a really big corridor and you tell it to do a sample every foot. It's going to take a little while to rebuild, regen. So you can see my sampling frequency increase there. The reason this is not daylighting right here properly is because when we built that EG surface, there was like this is where you had the survey, and then you had like the LiDAR or something. And then we combined those together, and I used a boundary, and I wasn't real precise on meshing those two things together because it was just a class, but that's why it's doing that, because that came through right through here. We had the same issue when I put this inlet out here, like that. I threw that inlet out there, the top wasn't following the surface, and right here, see how that top's not following the surface? Like why is this? It's because so the computer, there is no surface there. So that's what's going on there. Or no, it's not that one. It's this one. Sorry. Okay, so all right. Well, that was it for today. I just really wanted to get through the assemblies, sub-assemblies, all that jazz. Again, just knowing the terminology is key because you'll see this stuff in the corridor modeling. Walkaways are, the corridor properties. Sorry, go back into corridor properties for 9 times out of 10. And don't let it overwhelm you. You just want to get in a basic roadway. Many times too, I will just use the corridor to get to the edge of the road, just to find the edge of the road. I'll have this feature line then here, so I can use this external feature line here, there. See, if I click on that, the whole corridor highlights, right? But I can go into the feature lines and hit create feature from corridor. Pick that. Select the corridor model. Yeah. What's it doing for me? I guess I got to pick in 2D. I'll have to come back to this. You're supposed to be able to pick that, and then it will extract that feature line for, and here it did it, but not exactly how I wanted it. I have to revisit that. It looks like it's changed a little bit. But it will extract that feature line, and then you can use your grading objects to daylight down with the grading object or kind of customize it in. I do that a lot. Not so much on a drive like this, but when it's in a more complicated site. Okay, well, if there's no questions, we'll kind of hit more on this next week, and then keep moving along to the next topic. It looks like on my thing here, it looks like session 8 and session 9 were the same content. So yeah, we'll look at that next week and in some more detail, and then kind of start moving into the next phase on this training, which is phase 4. When we do a little bit more hands-on stuff now that you guys have the fundamental tools at your fingertips. But by and large, between the pipe networks, the corridor models, the grading objects, alignments, profiles, as you're starting to look through these things, next week we'll hit on intersections, but we've covered most of the software at this point. Points, feature lines, grading objects, alignments, profiles, corridors. We hit assemblies, pipe networks, profile views. We didn't hit sections. I wasn't planning on it because talking to Chris and whatnot, it's something that doesn't seem like you guys would really use to do like display of sections like you would for profiles. Honestly, we don't use it that much either. But we'll do intersections. And then from there, move into kind of phase 4, where we start getting a little bit more hands-on with stuff. Now that you guys have these
this base understanding of the content. Does that sound good?
Yeah, sounds good.
Are you guys getting opportunities to